My name is Hazel Donnelly. I'm 31 years old, and for the past 6 years, I worked as a federal investigator with the Department of Justice Financial Crimes Unit. I wasn't the kind of person who made headlines. I was the kind of read them and knew what was missing. Last Thanksgiving, my family held their annual dinner at my uncle's house in Naperville, Illinois. 40-some people packed into a colonial with a flag by the front door and a framed photo of my grandfather above the fireplace. He'd been a federal judge for 30 years, the kind of man whose name still opened doors in this state. I was not invited. My mother called me the Tuesday before and said, gently, the way she always said hard things, "Your uncle thinks it's better if you sit this one out, Hazel." I asked why. She paused too long. After everything at the agency, he doesn't want it to become a topic. So I sat in my apartment in Wicker Park with leftover pad thai and a glass of wine I didn't finish. I told myself I didn't care. I was 30 years old. I'd survived worse than a missed turkey dinner. But the thing about being erased by the people who are supposed to know you best is that it never fully leaves your body. It sits somewhere behind your sternum. Quiet, patient, like a bruise that looks healed but aches when the weather changes. 3 weeks after that Thanksgiving, something happened that made every single person in that colonial wish they had kept my seat at the table. I want to tell you what I did that got me cut out. And then I want to tell you what happened when the truth finally came back around. My grandfather kept a wall in his study, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and in the center, a section he called the record. Framed certificates, newspaper clippings, commendations from governors and senators, a handwritten letter from a federal appeals court judge congratulating him on a landmark ruling. As kids, we weren't allowed to touch anything on that wall. We weren't even supposed to point at it. It was a monument, not a display. When I was 9, he added my school essay to the corner of that wall. It was about justice. My teacher had given me an A+ and written "future lawyer" in red ink at the top. My grandfather framed it himself. He called me his sharpest one. That essay came down when I was 28. I didn't find out it was gone until my cousin mentioned it offhand during a phone call. "Grandpa rearranged the study," she said. "Took a few things down." I knew what that meant. I didn't ask her to confirm it. Here's what I did, and here's why none of them wanted to hear my side of it. 18 months before that Thanksgiving, I was assigned to a case that had been quietly circulating through our unit for almost 2 years. On paper, it looked like a routine wire fraud investigation. A mid-level financial advisory firm in Chicago's North Shore suburbs had been flagging irregularities in client accounts, older clients, mostly retirees. Most of them had no idea anything was wrong. My supervisor handed me the file on a Monday morning and said, "It's probably nothing, Donnelly. Clean it up fast." He said that a lot. Clean it up fast. What he meant was, find the lowest hanging explanation, write the report, close it. I didn't close it. Within 6 weeks, I had traced the irregularities to a pattern, not one firm, not two, but a network of 11 advisory offices across northern Illinois and southern Wisconsin. The same methodology in each one. Clients over 70. Accounts slowly drained through a structure of microtransfers that looked like legitimate fee adjustments. Hundreds of thousands of dollars per victim. Some of them had lost everything they'd saved for 40 years. The total amount stolen was just under $19 million. I built the case file myself, working late most nights, cross-referencing account records, interviewing clients who cried on the phone while trying to explain what had happened to their retirement. One woman, 82 years old, told me she'd been eating 1 meal a day for 3 months because she didn't know if her money would last. She kept apologizing to me for crying. I kept telling her she had nothing to apologize for. When I brought the full case to my supervisor, he looked at the file for maybe 4 minutes. Then he set it on his desk and said, "We need to talk about scope." Scope meant slow down. Scope meant we might be stepping on other people's territory. Scope, in this case, meant that one of the partners at the largest firm in the network had a name that rhymed with the wrong kind of problem. His name was my uncle's closest friend, had been for 30 years. He had golfed at my grandfather's retirement celebration. He had been mentioned in the toast. My supervisor called me back into his office 2 days later and told me the case was being reassigned. Restructured was the word he used. They were narrowing the scope to one firm, the smallest one, the one with the least exposure. The other 10 would be handed to a different unit, but not urgently. Not with the same documentation. Not with a $19 million number attached. I asked him directly, "Are we protecting someone?" He didn't answer. He just said, "You're a good investigator, Donnelly. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I made it harder. I submitted my full case file through an internal ethics channel, which I was legally entitled to do. I documented everything: the reassignment, the scope conversation, the timeline, the connection between the subject and my supervisor's professional network. I didn't accuse anyone of a crime. I just put the facts in writing and let them sit where they couldn't be ignored. What happened next happened fast. Within a month, I was placed on administrative review. The reason cited was procedural irregularities in my documentation. I knew that was false. My documentation was the cleanest in the unit. I had been told so in writing 6 months earlier during my performance review. I was reassigned to a desk role. Then my security clearance was quietly downgraded. I wasn't fired. They were smarter than that. They just made the work impossible and waited for me to leave. But here's the part that really cut: my uncle found out through the friend. Not the true version. The version where I'd gone rogue, made unsubstantiated accusations, risked the reputation of a respected community member over a vendetta I apparently had. I don't know where the vendetta detail came from. I had never met this man more than twice in my life. My uncle called my father. My father called my mother. My mother called me with that gentle voice and said, "I think you need to consider whether the stress of the job is affecting your judgment, sweetheart." I didn't argue. I had learned by then that arguing with people who have already decided the story is a losing game. Within 3 months, my name was gone from the Donnelly family group chat. I found out because a cousin texted me separately to let me know about a birthday party. "I would have included you in the main thread, but, you know." I said I understood. I didn't understand. At my grandfather's 85th birthday dinner that spring, I was not mentioned in my uncle's toast. He went around the table, each grandchild, each achievement. He spent 4 sentences on my cousin, who had recently made partner at a downtown firm. He spent 3 on my younger brother, who had just gotten a promotion in marketing. He looked past me twice. I was sitting 7 feet away. I drove home that night and cried for the first time in maybe 2 years. Not because I was angry, because I was tired. There is a specific exhaustion that comes from being correct and invisible at the same time. I quietly resigned from the Department of Justice 8 months after the ethics filing, not because they fired me, because I had watched the full case file get quietly buried under administrative language, and I understood that fighting it from inside was no longer possible. I took a position with a nonprofit legal advocacy organization that helped elderly fraud victims navigate civil recovery processes. Less money, smaller office, better sleep. I did not tell anyone in my family why I really left. I did not tell them what I knew, who was involved, or how much had been taken. I had signed documentation. More importantly, those $19 million victims were real people. The 82-year-old woman still eating 1 meal a day didn't need her trauma turned into a family dinner argument. So I stayed quiet. I let them think what they wanted. It cost me something I'm still not sure I have words for. 2 months before that Thanksgiving, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. The woman on the other end introduced herself as a senior attorney with the FBI's Chicago field office. She said she had been reviewing a case file that had been internally submitted through a DOJ ethics channel about 18 months prior. She said, "Ms. Donnelly, I want to be honest with you. Someone in your former unit flagged your submission to a contact of mine almost a year ago. It took us this long to work through the jurisdictional questions, but the documentation you submitted was accurate, thorough, and it became the foundation for a federal investigation that is now reaching indictment stage." I sat down on the floor at my kitchen. She told me that the full network, all 11 firms, had been investigated by a joint FBI and SEC task force. 14 individuals had been charged. The total amount of recovered assets was over $16 million. Restitution proceedings were underway for over 300 victims. "We would like to formally acknowledge your role in initiating this investigation," she said. "There will be a press briefing. We would like you to be present if you're willing." I said I would think about it. Then I said yes. The press briefing was held at the Dirksen Federal Building on a Thursday morning in early December. I wore a gray blazer and flat shoes. I did not tell my family I was going. My uncle's annual holiday gathering was that same Saturday. The one I had not been invited to for 2 years running. The one where my grandfather's chair sat at the head of a long table and the record wall in his study held every name in the family except mine. I did not crash it. I did not call anyone. I drove to the Dirksen building, parked in a garage 2 blocks away, and took the elevator to the 4th floor. There were maybe 40 people in the room. Journalists, attorneys, DOJ officials, a handful of victim advocates. The FBI's special agent in charge opened the briefing. She walked through the case, the network, the scope, the charges. She used the phrase substantial investigative foundation and cited the origin of the case as an internal ethics submission made by a former DOJ investigator. Then she said my name. Hazel Donnelly identified the network, built the documentation, and submitted the complete case file at significant personal and professional cost. Without that submission, this investigation would not have begun when it did, and hundreds of elderly victims would have continued to lose assets. A woman in the second row turned around to look at me. She was maybe 70, small, wearing a burgundy coat. She was one of the victim advocates. I had never seen her before, but she looked at me like she knew exactly who I was, and she nodded once, slowly. I didn't cry, but it was close. Afterward, in the hallway, a man in his early 60s approached me. He introduced himself as the son of one of the victims, a retired teacher from Evanston whose account had been drained of just over $300,000. His mother had passed away 6 months prior, not from the fraud, but in the last year of her life she had carried the weight of it. He said, she talked about the investigator who called her, the one who let her talk for 40 minutes and didn't rush her. She said she felt like someone finally believed her. I remembered that call. I Ivy to take her time. He held out his hand. "Thank you," he said, "for not closing the file." I shook his hand and didn't say anything for a moment because there wasn't anything to say that would have been big enough. The press briefing story ran in the Tribune that evening. Local affiliates picked it up. By Friday morning, it had been shared widely, particularly in financial crime and elder advocacy communities. The headline used the phrase, whistleblower. I had never thought of myself that way, but I understood why they did. My phone was quiet all of Friday. Not a single text from my family. Then Saturday morning, my mother called. She didn't say hello the way she usually did. She said, "Hazel Evan reading." And her voice was different. Not gentle. Something under it. Something cracking. I said, "I know." She said, "You never told us." I said, "I couldn't." There was a long pause, the kind of pause that holds 15 months of missed dinners and group chats you weren't added to and toasts where your name was skipped. She said, "I am so sorry." And I believed her. My mother had never known what the silence was actually protecting. My uncle called that afternoon. It was the first time he had called me in over a year. He did not apologize. He said, "I want you to know I understand more now than I did." I said, "I know." He said, "The situation was presented to me in a way that wasn't complete." I said, "I understand." He said he would like to have dinner sometime. I said, "Maybe." My grandfather called on Sunday. He is 86 years old and still sharp as anything. He called from the landline in his study, the one next to the wall where my essay used to be. He said, "Your grandmother and I watch the news." His voice was slower than I remembered. He said, "I need you to know something." I waited. That essay is going back up, and I'm putting the Tribune piece next to it. I had to put the phone down for a second, just for a second. He said, "I'm proud of you, Hazel." I should have asked more questions before I assumed. It wasn't everything. It didn't undo the Thanksgiving alone or the birthday party text or the toast where I was invisible. But it was something real. And my grandfather doesn't say things he doesn't mean. What happened after the press briefing didn't stop at my family. The nonprofit where I now work received a grant 6 weeks later from a legal foundation specifically to expand elder financial fraud recovery services in Illinois. I was named as the lead attorney on the program. We opened intake in January. In the first month, we took on 42 new cases. The 82-year-old woman, the one who had been eating one meal a day, had already received partial restitution from the recovery proceedings. She called our office to say thank you. She spoke to one of our paralegals. She said she had just had dinner at her daughter's house and there had been leftovers. She laughed when she said it. I thought about her a lot during those first weeks, about how many people carry an injustice quietly because they assume no one will believe them, or because the system made it clear that speaking up would cost them more than staying silent. How many files got closed before anyone asked the right questions? How many walls have photographs with no women in them? I don't live in anger about what happened to me. I spent a long time in it, and it wasn't useful. What I carry instead is something more like precision. A commitment to paying attention, to not closing things fast, because someone in a position of authority says to. My uncle and I did have that dinner. It was at a Thai place in Lincoln Park, just the two of us in February. It was awkward for the first 20 minutes. We talked about my grandfather's health, my brother's new apartment, nothing important. And then he set his fork down and said, "I let someone else's version of events shape how I treated you. That was wrong. And I'm sorry." I looked at him for a moment. He wasn't performing it. His hands were flat on the table and his eyes were steady. "I know why it happened," I said. "You believed what made sense to you with the information you had." "That's generous," he said. "It's true," I said. We ate the rest of dinner and talked about something else. It wasn't a full reconciliation. It wasn't a Hollywood moment, but it was honest, and that counted for something. I still think about the wall in my grandfather's study, the one that holds the record. There's something uncomfortable about legacy walls, about the way families decide who counts and who gets footnoted, about who holds the pen when the story gets written. But I also think about what I've built since, the files that didn't get closed, the 300 victims who got some portion of their money returned, the 42 cases we opened in January, the woman who had leftovers at her daughter's house. That's a record too. It just doesn't fit in a frame. If you're carrying something quiet right now, something you did right that the people around you decided was wrong, I want you to know that I understand that specific kind of loneliness. The kind where you're not even angry anymore, just tired. Tired of the distance between what you know to be true and what everyone around you is comfortable believing. I can't promise you it comes back around the way it did for me. Some people wait a long time. Some people never get the phone call. But I can tell you this, the work matters whether or not anyone witnesses it. The file you refuse to close matters even when someone buries it. The truth has a specific weight to it, and it doesn't disappear just because someone decided it was inconvenient. I keep a photo on my desk at work. It's from the press briefing. I'm not even looking at the camera. I'm looking at something off to the side, some thought I was in the middle of. I look tired, honestly, but I look like myself. And my grandfather's study wall now has 2 things with my name on them. A 3rd-grade essay about justice and a Tribune article about $19 million and 300 people who needed someone to not give up. I think about the version of me who drove home from that birthday dinner and cried on the couch. I want to tell her, it's going to take longer than you think. It's going to cost you more than feels fair. There will be Thanksgivings you eat alone and group chats you're not added to and toasts where someone looks right through you. But the file is real. The work is real. And eventually, the truth finds its level. It always does. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since everything happened. Not in any mystical sense. Just the plain, unglamorous mechanics of it. You make a choice. That choice has a cost. And then, if you're patient enough and stubborn enough and willing to live with the discomfort long enough, the cost eventually reveals what it purchased. When I refused to close that file, I lost my seat at every table that mattered to my family. I lost the group chat. I lost the toast. I lost the wall in my grandfather's study. And for a long time, I questioned whether the math made sense, whether what I'd done was worth what it took from me. But here's what I've come to understand. The math was never the point. There's a woman in Evanston who had been eating one meal a day. She wasn't a headline. She wasn't a case number to me. She was a real person who'd spent 40 years building something and then watched it disappear through a process she didn't understand, surrounded by systems that were supposed to protect her and didn't. When I called her the first time, she apologized to me for crying. She apologized. That detail has never left me. Because that's what injustice does over time. It teaches people to be sorry for their own pain. I think about what would have happened if I had closed the file the way I was told to. Clean it up fast. I would still have had my clearance. I probably would have kept my desk. I might have been at Thanksgiving that year. I would have eaten turkey with people who thought well of me, and somewhere across the city, 300 people would have kept losing everything they had, one small transfer at a time, and no one would have been looking. That's the thing about integrity that nobody warns you about. It's not dramatic when you're in it. It doesn't feel like a heroic choice. It feels like paperwork at 11 at night and a supervisor who won't make eye contact, and a phone call from your mother asking if you're sure your judgment is okay. It feels like losing things slowly, quietly, in ways that are hard to explain to people who weren't there. What I know now is that character isn't what you perform for people who are watching. It's what you do when the room is empty and the file is right in front of you, and the easy thing and the right thing are pointing in completely different directions. My grandfather taught me that, actually, which is part of what made his silence so hard to carry. But I also think I understand him better now. He spent his whole life inside a system. When that system told him a story about me, he believed it because that's what you do when you've trusted something for 60 years. What changed him wasn't my argument. It wasn't a conversation. It was evidence. And that's a lesson too. You don't win people back by explaining yourself. You win them back, if you win them back at all, by letting the truth do its own work. You keep building. You keep the file open. You take the 42 cases in January and you answer every phone call, and you don't let the size of the problem make you stop. My name is back on that wall now. I didn't put it there. My grandfather did. That's not a small thing. That's the whole thing.